anytime you want to.
I use inhalers.
This interview by Raymond Walked. My address is 11441 West 104th Street, Overland Park, Kansas 66214. My phone number is 913-492-6111. The name of our organization is Volunteers at the Central Plains National Archives, located in Kansas City, Missouri. Also assisting at this interview as a recorder is Emily Hughes Dominic, whose address is 2312 East Bannister Road, Kansas City, Missouri. We have no relationship to the person being interviewed today. Our interview today, October 5th, 2004, is with Mary Hester, who was born October 24th, 1929, at Howe, Indiana. Her current address is 3400 West 92nd Street, Leawood, Kansas. Her current phone number is 913-649-8910. Her branch of service was in the Air Force. Her rank was First Lieutenant, and she served in Korea. Mary, you might want to start by telling us what you were doing before you got into the service.
Okay. Well, I was raised in Howe, Indiana on the farm, and I went to South Bend, Indiana to go to Memorial Hospital School of Nursing, and it was a 3-year program. And when I was a senior in that program, there were recruits coming to our class asking if anyone telling us about the service, the opportunities in the service, and consider serving Uncle Sam because they needed us to take care of the wounded in Korea during the Korean conflict. So I thought that sounded, I always liked to travel, and I thought I would get to travel. So I enlisted, and they wrote back and said, you have to wait till you've passed your state boards. Well, I was taking the state boards in November after I graduated, and graduated in the end of August and took our state boards in November. And so I heard that I passed the state boards in about March. So, and then I let the service know, and I entered the service April 16th, 1951. I still remember that day. I was so excited. My folks took me to South Bend, and we caught a plane to South St. Louis, and got transportation into Scott Air Force Base. And that was also new and exciting to me because I'd really never been any further from home than about 40 miles. So I started doing nursing on the wards of the veterans that had returned and were back more locally, that lived more locally, and so I learned to take care of them the Air Force way. And then there was a enrollment thing posted. Anyone, they wanted 3 volunteers to go to Lowry Air Force Base, Colorado. And my name was first on the list because I thought, oh, I'll go out there and learn to ski. And so I was sent there, and I'd been there, let's see, April, May, June, about a month and a half, and there was a posting, volunteers to go to flight school. And I was signed up for it. I thought, oh, fly, that's what I really want to do, is fly. So I signed up for that and was sent to Montgomery, Alabama for flight school. And as I remember, that was a 2-month program, July and August, and I do remember it was very hot in Montgomery, Alabama. And we learned how to take care of patients at altitude, because there's some things that are a little bit different at altitude than they are at ground level, and how to evacuate and take care of patients during an evacuation from the plane and that kind of thing. So then, that was a 2-month class, as I remember. And I was sent back to Lowry Air Force Base, and August, and in October, I think, it was posted again, volunteers to go over to Japan, and then we would be involved in taking care of the veterans firsthand. So I did volunteer for that, and arrived in Japan I remember we arrived December 1st in Japan, and our head nurse said, met us and told us what would be expected of us and so forth. And we really didn't have much free time after we got there, but we did have to go down to the supply office and be fitted for our flight uniforms and our jackets and heavier clothes than ordinarily you have. And when I went down there, I met a Kenneth Hester. And I thought he was pretty nice looking, but anyway, I got my supplies and my supply kit. And then I started flying, and I remember the first plane that was loaded.
That's all right. Take your time.
There were so many casualties. Young kids. I haven't even thought about it. But anyway, the captain that I was with came up behind the pilots and she said, "You didn't come over here to cry. You come over here to work."
So you got trained very quickly then.
Very quickly.
When did you see your Mr. Hester again?
Well, on New Year's Eve, a friend of mine had a date with Kenneth Hester, and they fixed me up with a blind date that was a friend of Kenneth's for New Year's Eve. So we went to the officers club, and around 8, and by 10 o'clock, Ken and I were visiting more than I was with my date. And by New Year's, he said, "I'll just take you home, and Sarge can go home with her friend." So anyway, our first date was kind of New Year's Eve. And then after that, we started dating. Although we didn't have a lot of time to date because we were flying so much in the beginning. When we got in from our flights, we'd take our supplies up, and he would replenish our blanket bag, which was a large bag with about 6 or 10 blankets in, and our medical kit, the evacuation kit with the medicines and things that we would have used. And so he refurbished our supplies, and then we kept those in our quarters, so we were always ready to go. And then we just started flying. We originally, early on, we were flying like every other day, and the days were long. I mean, we'd go to the airstrip in the morning around 4 o'clock in the morning, and we'd be 4:30 or so, and then it took as I remember, by the time we loaded and got everything, about, it sounds 2 hours at least before we arrived. That doesn't sound right for the flying time, but it took quite a while. We always wanted to be there around 8 or 8:30.
From Japan to Korea.
Right.
You want to be in Korea by 8 o'clock in the morning?
Well, early in the morning, so we could get, and then we'd pick up the casualties. There were usually some ambulatory, and then many that were really mangled, very badly hurt.
You do this every other day, every day?
About every other day, because we'd leave like around 4 in the morning, and then by the time we got home, oftentimes it was 8 or 9 o'clock that night. So the days were long that we flew, and we would probably have the next day off. And the next day we'd do that same thing again.
What type of equipment did you fly on?
It depended on the number of patients we were to pick up. If the number was around 18 or 20, well, we'd go on the C-47s. Sometimes the C-46s, but those were so loud for the patients and not as nice as the C-47s. When we had a larger load, then we took the C-54, and there were always 2 nurses on that because there were more patients. And it seemed like there were like 30 or 40 patients on the 54. The smaller plane, the 46, the 47, there were around 20, 24 patients.
So you were all alone with about 20 patients taking care of them?
Usually. But on those also, first we'd load the most critical, and they were always loaded up closest to the pilots, right behind the compartment. And we analyzed the list of casualties because those that were not as critical were put on the top litter, and those that were the most critical were put on the two in-between litters. And then those that had wounds that would not likely need us, but needed attention, were on the bottom. So that's where we were taught to load the patients. And we told the medical techs where we wanted each person depending on their diagnosis. And then that would be maybe the first 8 or maybe 12, and then the rest of them would be ambulatory for athletes' foot, lots of foot infections because the guys had their shoes and socks on for months. Their feet really were in bad shape, a lot of, and then in the winter there was frostbite, and so we had a lot of those, and other wounds that just happened on the base of it.
How many flights do you think you made to pick up casualties?
I flew 700, and we had to fly 750 hours for rotation home, so I know that I flew at least probably about 760 because we were well over what I needed to come home.
Those are hours.
Hours in the air.
And then when did you see Kenneth again?
Oh, well, I would see him usually on the weekend, depending if I wasn't flying. I'd fly a day and be off a day, and I'd usually see him sometime during that day, maybe once or twice a week, but not real often because we were gone, and some weeks we didn't see each other at all. And then he asked me if I'd marry him about in May, so we went together to Tokyo to pick out our rings. I remember that. And so I was engaged in June to Kenneth.
Lieutenant Hester also?
Pardon?
Was he also lieutenant?
He was. He was first lieutenant, and then because of my flying hours, I was promoted to first lieutenant about a week or so before he was. So we jokingly said
You outranked him?
Got to outrank my husband for just a short time. Yeah.
So then you went to Tokyo, got married?
Yes. Well, now we didn't. We had to go to Tokyo to get a license from the American consulate because at that time, Japan had become independent legally, so we had to get a
They were no longer
First of all, we went to the American consulate to get their license. Then we had to take that to the Japanese office, and we had to get a Japanese marriage certificate. And I have that, you don't, I didn't bring it with me today. Then we had to take both certificates to the chaplain because I wanted to count marriages when we got married in the chapel, in the church wedding. So actually we were married twice on Kenneth's birthday, October 7th. We went to Tokyo. We went to Tokyo and we did that legal work, both offices, and then we came back to our home base in Tachikawa. Then he flew back to Korea. That all happened in one day and he was gone. I said, well, we're really legally married, but we're not gonna sleep together until we're married in the church. So that's just the way we believed and did.
So how many months were you over there flying from Japan to Korea?
Well, I arrived there December 1st of 51 and left in February of 53, so about 14 months.
14 months. When you were over there, how did you stay in touch with your family at home?
Well, just by letters, airmail letters. One time...
No email.
No email. You're right, no cell phones either. One time I made it special arrangements to call my folks. I think it was on my father's birthday, but I had to fill out a lot of papers to get permission to just use the phone to call. And the time is so different, so I had to figure out when I could call that they would be available. And they just couldn't believe that I could call from Japan and talk with them. So,
It's about 15 hours difference.
yes, yeah. They really hoped that we wouldn't get married till we came home. You know, they wanted to be at the wedding, but they couldn't. No one flew like that. Parents couldn't fly to Japan because we were married on the air base on the 26th. I told you we were married twice on his birthday on the 7th, and then we waited till October 26th to have our church wedding and a week off. So we had a week.
Bob Rocket to the dock for drop, please. Bob to the dock for the drop.
Was there very much entertainment there for you on your off days? Or did you just entertain
Well,
yourselves?
We were on the air base, and we did have a theater, and there was a bowling alley, and then the officers' club. We usually had dinner there with. They had an orchestra and dancing and so forth. I don't know. No one thought about entertainment. We just went out. We bought my friends and I bought a bicycle so we could ride out through the base and visit the Japanese. And I told you that one time I got a train into a little city where my parents had a missionary station, and I found out her address, so I took a friend along, and we found this orphanage over there in Japan that my mother's circle supported, and we spent a day there with them, seeing what they did, and kind of interviewing us, and we interviewing them. And what was interesting is when I showed the pictures, we took slides then, and I brought them back and showed them to my mother's ladies' aid. And one lady said, "That's my quilt, that's my quilt." She saw her quilt on one of the kids' beds. I thought that was, she couldn't believe it, that quilt was there, and I saw it in Japan. That was kind of different. You know, that's what we did on days off.
A little earlier you showed me a photograph when you were in Seoul. You went to a school.
Oh, we did. I was always interested in children, you know, schools and little kids and of every place. And someone had told us that there was a school in downtown Seoul. So we went with them, and I can't remember who it was, but we had to be accompanied by a man to go into Seoul. And we got to visit that school, and the walls were bombed out. And the little kids were sitting there in the rubble being taught, and there was a makeshift organ there, and I remembered how good it sounded because somebody got up and played the organ and the kids sang. And I love to hear children sing, so and that was interesting.
You remember the day you came back?
Oh, sure. I do.
I hope you do.
I do. Well, my husband had gone over to Japan on the boat, on the ship. But because they needed nurses, we flew over so we could go to work. And so when it came to coming home, they said, "Well, how do you want to go home?" And I said, "Oh, I'd like to take a boat." And he said, "I've been on a boat once." But I said, "Let's just go again. We'll be together and it'll be all right." So he said he'd come home on the boat. So we spent about 12, that sounds like too many,
12 days?
12 days
About right.
coming home. And we had a stateroom together, so that made it nice. And of course, lots of GIs on that boat coming home. And we ate in the officers' mess hall, and I thought that was
Nice.
nice. Now, there wasn't a lot of entertainment compared to a cruise nowadays, but, you know, we
Just on a military boat? Or?
yes, it was.
So when you got home, I guess the war was over for you. And what did you do
It
afterwards?
was. Well, it was pretty well settled over there by the time we came home. We requested they asked what area you'd like to be stationed in. Kenneth and I both said Kansas, so we were assigned to Forbes Air Force Base over at Topeka. And we were there then. I was out in June, and and then Kenneth was out later. His points didn't rack up as fast as mine did. So,
What year was that?
1953. So in order to have something to do, I went to Stormont Vale Hospital in Topeka, and they were still needing nurses, so I out of the service and right into civilian nursing. I've loved nursing, every part of it, everywhere I go. I've liked it. Then Kenneth was discharged in, seemed like the end of July. It was just a couple months. And then he was ready to come back to Kansas City. But we had a furlough, I think they called it. And we went back to visit my folks. And then we went down to Fayetteville, Arkansas and visited for his family. And both of us thought the area that we went to was a little strange. He had not been up to northern Indiana, and I for sure had not been to Arkansas. So there were some cultural differences right in the beginning. Well, people didn't travel around as much then as they do now, and neither one of us had TV.
And you were a Yankee.
I was a Yankee.
He was not.
And my grandmother wrote and said, "I am terribly disappointed in you. This will be the first rebel in our family." I mean, there was still feelings. I couldn't believe that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was.
So
No.
then you two then started your own life together.
We did. And
Raised a family.
Oh, yes. About 2 years after we were out of the service, we had our first child, Kenny, Hester Jr., and then about 14 months later, we had a daughter, Marilyn, and then about 2 years later, we had a son, Charles, and about 13 months later, we had a daughter, Janet. So we had 4 children in 5 years. I was very busy with my home life, and he found a job as a
The
farmer.
walk-ins in our front office. The walk-ins are in our front office.
He found a job in Kansas City as a pharmacist and worked for Crown Drug Store,
Yes.
and that's where he. So. Then we heard about a program that Korean government was inviting the veterans to return. So in October, we did it in October because that was our anniversary.
Which year?
97. We went back to Korea. We paid our airfare, but they took care of the hotel and all the food and all the tours and everything. And they presented this medal to both my husband and me in thanking us for all the good that American and Allied forces did for them. They took us up to the Panmunjom and there we saw 2 soldiers facing each other, North Korea's and South Korea's, and just a table apart. And our guide said someday those people are going to get started standing there. He was hoping that someday Korea would be united. But South Korea is just, they had large buildings, they had a subway system, they built, when we were there was just one bridge across the river, and our guide said now there's 19 bridges across the river. They've adopted Christianity. It's one of the largest Protestant churches in all the country, in Seoul, Korea. And they have services in all different languages, and they do that by the computer, I guess. The sermon is preached, but you can hear it in your own language if you push a certain button and wear the earphones. It was just wonderful to go back over there and see how well, but they just kept thanking us for spending some time in South Korea and freeing them from
North.
right. It made us sad that there was even a line there.
Yes. So over the years, your family grew.
Oh yes, we did. We have 16 grandchildren. Kenny has 3, 2 boys and a girl. Marilyn has 6, 5 boys and a girl. Charlie has 3, a girl and 2 boys. And my youngest daughter, Janet, has 3 boys and a girl.
Wonderful.
So 1 girl in each family and all the rest boys.
You made a lot of friends while you were in the service. Do you still see these people?
Oh, yes, we do.
Reunions?
Well, we have that 801st reunion about every 3 or 4 years. And there are fewer people meeting every year. You know, some of us are.
And what is the 801st? Might want to say what the 801st was.
801st Medical Air Evacuation Squadron. Yeah, MAES.
Is there anything else we might not have covered you might want to mention?
No, except it was great to go back to Korea.
Yes.
And think how wonderful that it was that they turned around and thanked us for all we did for them. And I hope that we see other countries do that in the future.
So you felt your time in the service was well spent.
Very well.
Did a lot of good for your government, for your
Yes.
country.
I was glad to serve. My father had served in World War I. My brother was in World War II in the Army Air Force. And he said, if you're going to join the service, join the Air Force. He was in the Army Air Force. My other brother served in Japan after the war was over, what do you call those?
Army of Occupation.
Well, they still had a lot of GIs in Japan for a long time after it was over. Oh, I'm trying to think of the word. But it was during the occupation. And one thing he said is that there were a lot of GIs that were killed during that occupation because Japanese snipers would just see them on the sidewalk and go reshoot them. Now, we didn't hear much about it, but my brother said that there were a lot of casualties after the war was over in Japan.
Not unlike Iraq.
Pardon?
Similar to Iraq.
Oh, right. Yeah, that. I do know that there were over 56,000 killed during the Korean campaign. And I don't remember exactly the number of casualties, but that's a lot.
That's a
It
lot.
is. But Korea would tell us it was worth everything you did, the way we live now. So, I was glad to have a part of that.
Not bad. Very exciting for a young girl at that time.
Oh, it was. Yes, it was. It was tragic, but
Yes.
once after I got my bearings, so the first exposure to that kind of casualty is difficult. Sometimes they say nurses don't have a heart. They've got a big heart. They just have to kind of back off a little bit to do their jobs.
Yes. As you know, or you may not know, Mary, the National Archives in Kansas City has a lot of genealogical information. And for the sake of the record, if you want to, you might want to tell us what your mother and father's name was, where they came from, maybe their grandparents, if you remember. Then maybe you might want to go to your husband's side of the family for 1 or 2 generations. So if anybody's researching this at some time out of your family or somewhere else, they might find this information on this interview here. So what were your mother and father's names, and where they came from?
My mother's official name was Nellie Sarah Bottomley, Bottomley. And her parents had come from England, or maybe their parents, but they were very English and they were very northern and also proper. I mean, they liked to do things the English way. My mother was a school teacher, and she married my dad when he came home from the service in World War I, and he was a farmer. His name was Henry Claremont Wise, and he farmed up in northern Indiana. And then, well, I don't really remember for sure the names of the others.
How do you spell his last name? W-E-I?
W-E-I-S-S. Yeah. I can't remember the names. I didn't know we were going to do that.
I know that, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And then my husband's father's name is Hubert Hester, Hubert, Hester. And his mother's name was Naomi Roberts Hester. Her maiden name was Roberts, and she married a Hester, so that's it for theirs, that I know for sure.
Is there anything else you want to add to what we've talked about, Mary?
No, I think it's nice that you're recording some of these
No, thank you.
things that happened to us in our earlier years.
We want to thank you very much for the time you took to come down here and discuss this with us and tell us all about it. And we hope you have a very good, long life yet.
Thank you.
Thank you
I hope
again.
so too. Thank you.